The ground will shake. The earth will rumble. The Royal Rumble. 30 superstar wrestlers of the WWF bang heads in a winner-take-all rumble. 30 wrestlers, one ring. Something's got to give. And in a championship match, Bret the Hitman Hart puts his title on the line when he battles the ruthless Razor Ramon. The Royal Rumble, live Sunday, January 24th on pay-per-view.
Hey wrestling fans, welcome to my review of the 1993 Royal Rumble. Yes, it's Rumble season on my 93 flashback. So this took place on January the 24th, 1993. It came from the Arco Arena in Sacramento, California, and roughly 16,000 fans paid to see the show. This was slightly down from the previous year's 17,000. Of course, that Rumble, the 92 Rumble, was really memorable, including Ric Flair's spectacular performance and WWF title win in the Rumble main event, which is still considered by many to be the best Rumble match ever. 93 Rumble had a buy rate of 1.25. This was also lower than the 92 Rumble. That had a 1.8, but it says something for the decline of the WWF in the coming years. Then this was the highest buy rate in a while for a Rumble, because for a 4-year spell from 1994 to 1998, all those Rumbles, the buy rates took a bit of a turn, a bit of a downward turn. First major pay-per-view of the year. It's one of the traditional Big Four, which was such a big part of the WWF landscape at this time. Royal Rumble, WrestleMania, SummerSlam, and the Survivor Series. This is also a big history-making year for the Rumble match itself. Winner of the Rumble would become the number one contender and would face whoever, as Gorilla likes to say, the WWF champion would be at WrestleMania 9. A sort of big match of the card, Razor Ramon challenging Bret the Hitman Hart. First year then that had happened where the title shot would go to the Rumble winner. So obviously, after a few years of the Rumble match, the WWF felt that they needed to add a bit more prestige to it. That happened last year in a different way, and this year, for the first time, the winner would go to WrestleMania, so a guaranteed main event, and this became a long-running thing, and it lasts till this day. Over certain Rumbles, you've had it a little bit muddled up, a little murky, just because you've had two different world titles at various times. But certainly for a long time, when you had the one big title, the WWF title, and it meant a lot. It did add some spark to it. It did add a little bit of spice and created stakes for the Rumble match, and for the winner be someone who was on the cusp of becoming a star, but just needed that one big final push. And the idea is that the Rumble win would be that one big push that would leapfrog them into the main event at Mania and into the spotlight. So this Rumble, probably a good example of that, but this is where the tradition began. And there's a couple of title matches. You've got the unveiling of Narcissus as well. So you've got a few different things going on. So let's get into it. The 1993 Royal Rumble. We open up at the top of the show with the classic broadcast duo Bobby the Brain Heenan, Gorilla Monsoon. This is classic Monsoon and Heenan, as Heenan is so giddy and excited about the unveiling of the Narcissus later in the pay-per-view. As far as he's concerned, it's the main event of the show. He keeps interjecting as Monsoon runs down the card with, "But what about Narcissus?" until Monsoon finally loses his rag. Who cares? Who cares about Narcissus? And they go to the opening match. Very great, good stuff. The chemistry is off the chart. The pay-per-view opens with tag team action as we get another big debut from WCW, that of the Steiner brothers, who debuted in the last few weeks on Raw and WWF TV. They make their big pay-per-view bout, taking on another all-brother duo, Owen Blake, the Beverly Brothers, who I remind you lost to the Bushwhackers in a comedy match at the last year Rumble. So the Steiners must have been rubbing their hands with glee at this one. They must really have felt the warm welcome. The red carpet literally rolled out for them as we begin a very topsy-turvy and mostly disappointing run for the Steiners in the WWF. So even though it's on a pay-per-view, and even though the Beverly Brothers have a bit more of a name than your normal jobber, this, for all intents and purposes, is a job match. It's a match to showcase the Steiner Brothers' talents, and there's never really any doubt who's going to come out on top on this one. Bo and Blake do their part quite well, but the Steiners just have a lot of fun early on. There's a lot of early stalling tactics from the heels, but Rick just has a blast, chucking them around. Both men, big old Steiner line, known for the stiff style, the Steiners, and an impressive release German suplex there from Big Brother Rick. The Steiners also do some neat wrestling maneuvers. The takedown there from Scott, a hip toss. The Beverleys enjoy some short comebacks through some cheap tactics like the hair pull takedown there, and get some double team maneuvers in. Scott fires back with a tilt-a-whirl slam. Rick takes a power slam off the ropes, but then delivers a spectacular power slam of his own, catching the Beverly in midair. Scott's belly-to-belly suplex off the rope is eye-catching. The heels mount a bit of a comeback, nice backbreaker, axe handle off the ropes. They continue to work on the back. Beautiful double Boston Crab double team. Scott drills in with the tilt-a-whirl suplex. German release suplex, stereo Steiner line. Scott rolls through on the Beverly's double team and the Frankensteiner for the 1-2-3. The Steiner brothers win the opening match. Bearing in mind the standard of the outstanding opening tag team match from the Rumble 2 years ago with the Orient Express against the Rockers in a super competitive, explosive matchup, this just didn't cut the mustard. Even the match the previous year with the Orient Express again, this time against the New Foundation, was a pretty entertaining, lively opener. This just felt so one-sided, predictable, and it just didn't really have that energy that you would want from an opening match. It was quite good fun just seeing the Steiner brothers go through the motions, go through their sort of routines, chucking the Beverly Brothers about. The Beverlys are a decent enough team. They're not too bad in the ring. There were some nice spots, but overall this really didn't do that much for me as an opener. Not one to really get the crowd excited. I'll give this one 2 stars. Next up, the Intercontinental title matchup with former tag team partners Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty going at it, and dissension in the ranks first appeared at the Survivor Series 1991 after this Marty miscue.
Shawn really bent out of shape here, furious with Marty Jannetty, and Marty Jannetty, I'll tell you, it's like I was reading. There's distinction between the Rockers. They've hated each other for years. They did not. Will you stop? That's not true.
And the split was confirmed on the famous barbershop segment a month later.
If you want to stick together and make this thing work, when I turn around, we're going to shake hands and we're going to go on a rock and roll like the Rockers can do.
They need each other. You know that. Sounds fair to me.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Rockers!
Told you. Glad to see that.
Told you.
Oh, I knew he was going to do that. I just knew he was going to do that. He don't need Jannetty. I told you that off and on.
Are you kidding? What a despicable act that was.
Somebody's well-being. You better stay here. Oh my God!
Right through the glass window of the barber shop.
Jannetty tried to dive through the window to escape.
And so Shawn Michaels' most successful character is born, the Heartbreak Kid, as he goes full-time heel. Originally, him and Marty were supposed to have the blow-off feud in 1992, but Marty screwed that up by failing a drugs test, so he had to be let go. So they brought him back a year later, where they said he'd been out selling the injuries from the barbershop. After Marty's return on an edition of Superstars in early 93, where he got a piece of Shawn but also accidentally hit Sensational Sherry with the mirror, that leads to the showdown Royal Rumble between the two for Shawn's Intercontinental title, with Sherry stuck in the middle, and that perfectly sets up which way will she go as she comes out solo with a nervous look on her face. Sherry doing a great job of selling the conflict between these two and her emotional conflict. And Party Marty comes out looking like something out of a sci-fi B-movie. What the fuck does he look like? Shawn comes out in his famous gold outfit, which does look really cool. It looks like a great heel get-up. The commentators do a great job in setting the table and putting both guys over. Monsoon even calls Shawn Michaels the wrestler of the 90s. They're only a few years into the 90s, but fair play to Gorilla on that one. We get an early feeling out process between the two where they do know each other better than anyone, where they anticipate each other's moves. HBK does this really over-the-top, upside-down, backwards flip in the corner. He then takes an atomic drop from his former partner, and a high knee lift sends Michaels flying to the outside. Marty then hits a crossbody through the ropes, which looks pretty good. Another OTT bit of selling from the champion as he takes a Jannetty flying fist and literally twists himself round. The turning point comes when the heel runs Marty's shoulder into the ring post and then starts focusing on that for the next few minutes. Sadly, his dopey ex-partner starts selling the wrong shoulder in a major cock-up, but this becomes the pattern for the next few minutes. Michaels working over it with an armbar, running it into the corner. He gets a 2.5 count after an armbar drop, so sound strategy, but then the champion telegraphs move off the second rope as Marty gets his foot up just in the nick of time. Champ then has his shoulder run into the ring post as Jannetty gets back on top. Marty gets a near fall from a back suplex from the outside back in. And then in the big dramatic moment of the match, which shows just where Sherry's allegiance is live, Shawn is out close to her and she slaps him. What a Gorilla goes nuts. He sells it like crazy. Marty then hits a belly to back suplex over the ropes for a 2.5 count. Shawn barely escapes that one. The challenger scores another 2 count with a power slam catching HBK coming off the ropes. He then misses a flying fist off the top rope, but in a smooth adjustment lands on his feet like a cat. Hits a DDT for a hot near fall. HBK then misses a super kick and takes one of his own from Marty. Marty gets another near fall from a slingshot, and at this point Sherry comes into the ring with the intention of getting some redemption on her ex. Squeeze Michaels as she brings the shoe in, aims it for his head. Jannetty holds Michaels in position, but wouldn't you know, HBK ducks out the way. Sherry hits Jannetty by accident. Heenan suggests that it could have been intentional. Michaels with a half-hearted super kick for the 1-2-3. HBK retains the title. Sherry gets emotional, runs to the back where she's interviewed by Mean Gene, who does the classic, "Damn it, Sherry, settle down." And at that point, Michaels runs up, starts giving Sherry all kind of shit, seems about to hit a woman, but Marty to the rescue as the two brawl to set up, well, in theory, another rematch in the future, although it's not going to happen for a while yet because Marty gets his ass fired once again. And I've got to say, overall, I think this is a disappointing match. It didn't really live up to the bill. Decent story, fair play to Sherry, and it certainly had its moments, but Shawn had to carry Marty, and even Shawn at this point wasn't that amazing in the ring. Some of his selling was a bit too cartoonish. And overall, I just think it could have been a better match, and it's one of those things that I look back on and it's not as good a match as I remember. Give it 2.5 stars. Sherry has to pick up the pieces with a new guy, and Shawn has a new main squeeze, but more on that in a few months at WrestleMania 9. You'll never guess who his main squeeze is. Never, never, never.
I think he's cute. He's so sexy. He's got the look. This riser goes wild. Got the moves that really move me. He sends chills up and down my spine. Just my sexy boy. He's not your boy toy. He's just my sexy boy. He's not your boy toy.
Next up for match number 3, we get the pay-per-view comeback of
Bam Bam! Bam Bam!
Yes, the Beast from the East returned to the WWF after a few years away in 1992, working his way back up the ranks, and this is his first pay-per-view match against the Big Boss Man. Not much longer for the WWF. Ray Traylor has had a great run though, and is happy to put the Beast over on his way out. This is a pretty standard big man style matchup between these two. It's watchable enough just because they're both solid enough workers. They both move well for men of their size, but nothing really to write home about. It's always pretty obvious that Bigelow's probably going to come out on top. It definitely feels like filler from that point of view. Both missed big high spots early on. Man is backdrop to the outside, and then Bigelow focuses on his back throughout the rest of the match. Bigelow misses a flying crossbody off the rope, which gives Bossman a bit of an opening. He nails Bam Bam with a hard, stiff, swinging uppercut and goes through his normal routine, leg drop across the top rope. But Bigelow turns things around, returning to the back after Bossman misses a move in the corner. Bigelow focuses on the back with a backdrop on the canvas. Bigelow then looks to put Bossman away, but misses with a diving headbutt off the ropes. And Bossman has another opportunity to get the win, but eventually he's caught in the corner, and Bam Bam up top for the diving headbutt, his finishing maneuver for the 3 count. In the end, an easy Bam Bam victory. Job done. Big Boss Man was professional in his final major WWF appearance of this spell anyway. He had a great run and was a big part of the boom period from the late 80s to early 90s. He would show up in WCW later in the year, December 93, whereas the Guardian Angel, he would start feuding with international champion Rick Rude, also feud with top babyface Sting, joining big monster heel faction the Dungeon of Doom, and on the first edition of WCW Monday Nitro, he took on none other than Hulk Hogan, his real-life friend himself. For a number of gimmicks and mostly treading water in his time in Atlanta, Ray Traylor would not be seen again in Titan Tower till the late 90s. I'm going to give this match 2 stars. Next up, it's time for the semi-main event and the second big title match of the evening, as defending champion Bret the Hitman Hart puts his WWF title on the line against the bad guy Razor Ramon. Razor, who's had a meteoric rise since debuting in the Federation in the summer of 1992. He also was in one of the main events at Survivor Series. Big opportunity in the spotlight against Bret the Hitman Hart. And this one is personal, as in recent weeks Razor had attacked Bret's brother Owen in the locker room during an interview, and has also made personal comments about his mother and father. It's a really good match. They really deliver. Razor's a really strong in-ring performer himself, but Bret really carries the match in many ways too, and the contrasting styles just work so well. They just spar off each other really nicely. The match has a good flow, but also tells a really good story and is really engaging to watch. Razor using a lot of his power and size advantage early on to keep Bret Hart on his toes. He wears him down, works over the back and arms, which is smart strategy because it negates the sharpshooter. So we see a nice old school abdominal stretch at one point. We also see a standing bear hug in the centre of the ring. So again, that power, strength advantage and size advantage coming into play. And we also get nice slow comebacks from Bret, who in a way is, even though he's got the more experience and is the champion, he is kind of presented as the underdog for a lot of this match, because it's the story being told is that the fresh kid on the block, Razor, maybe has Bret's number. So for a lot of the match, Bret does some impressive selling and a very much hit and run strategy, as Razor dominates a lot of the early part of the match. But what I like is the sense of a struggle between the two, as Bret slowly counters manoeuvres like the abdominal stretch. He doesn't just pop out willy-nilly. He manoeuvres his way out, comes away with an eventual hip toss, but even then he's still weakened, and you still get Razor coming back on top. Bret once again countering and slowly fights back. There's a good tussle between the two, a good brawl at one point with Bret fighting fire with fire, and naturally he goes to works on the legs on the outside of the post. We get the ring post spot where he runs the knee into the ring post but then puts the figure four on the ring post, which I really like, as we go to the latter stages with Razor taking back control as he gets the foot up on a Bret Hart second rope, and he smells the title going for his pattern at Razor's edge, gets Bret Hart up, seems to have him in control, but Bret struggling is able to counter. The crowd really into at this point, reverse into a backside, and he almost gets him very close. Razor back to the back, tossing Bret into the ropes. The buckle, we see a bit of mocking from the bad guy as he slaps the hair. Then a test of strength, which Bret, a nice counter into a sunset flip, but the referee's very slow to make the count. Could have made a difference, but here we see the closing of the match. Great technical wrestling again from Bret. A figure four turns it over into the sharpshooter. Razor submits. Bret Hart, with a well-earned victory, retains his title as the Hart family celebrate at ringside. Bret Hart still the WWF champion, but Razor looking good in defeat. I'm going to give this one 4 stars. Match of the night, in my opinion. Next up, Bobby the Brain Heenan leaves the broadcast position for his big unveiling of Narcissus, which he has been hyping up for weeks and weeks. The Gorilla gets across how the Brain has been down in the dumps ever since Mr. Perfect turned his back on him and left the fold with him and Ric Flair. It's the big unveiling, and it is, of course, Lex Luger's debut about a year after leaving WCW, as I covered on my Super Brawl 2 review also on this channel. Lex Luger left WCW after dumping the world title to Sting in the main event. Luger then spent a year as the figurehead for Vince McMahon's WBF World Bodybuilding Federation, one of many failed projects from Vince that isn't the WWF and isn't wrestling. So that bombed and died a death. Rumble debut with this Roman-like Adonis-style gimmick character, which, to be honest, at the time certainly fits Luger down to a T, as many people would say. It's worth saying he has changed a lot since and become a far more humble, down-to-earth guy. But at this time, many within the wrestling industry believed that this sort of character was really close to Lex's own personality. He's obviously a big, jacked-up bodybuilder, has the look, so it really fits. He's unveiled by Heenan. You get this stunning, godlike type music. Heenan just goes all in on this segment, absolutely orgasmic, and he puts Luger over like $1,000,000, just describing all the movements, all the poses, and just he's so enraptured in him, doing a fantastic job. It's a shame they couldn't have him as Luger's regular manager after this. I guess they could have done, but at this point he's gone full-time broadcasting, so that's fair enough, and why not? He's one of the greatest broadcasters ever. But this certainly is a very successful debut. Now, I'm going to obviously cover Luger's progress over the next year coming up, so I don't want to say too much about whether he fails or if he's a success, but we'll go into that because it's the second big pay-per-view debut of a former WCW wrestler to the Steiner brothers in the opening match, and there's still another one in the Rumble, believe it or not, but this is the big unveiling, and it's a big success. In a brief interview, he actually mentions Mr. Perfect and puts him down and makes his intentions towards him clear, which makes sense considering the heat with Perfect and Heenan. But overall, this was a really entertaining segment. Job done. Heenan does a fantastic job, and it was a joy to behold. So it's time for the main event and the fifth WWF Royal Rumble match to be held on pay-per-view, and to be honest, perhaps the most disappointing of the 5 so far. It's not terrible, it certainly has its highlights, and it has the right result, I'll say that, but more on that later. But overall, a pretty weak matchup with a pretty weak field. Certainly drags that time. Because of the Roman theme for this year's WrestleMania, we get Caesar and Cleopatra lookalikes out reading the Grand Old Scrolls, setting the table for the winner of this Rumble going to WrestleMania 9. I guess someone in the office had the really easy job of just hiring local Caesar Cleopatra lookalike for parties. Good job, pal, whoever you were. So, the highlight of the early part of this Rumble is the stuff to do with Ric Flair, to the dismay of Bobby the Brain Heenan, who goes from orgasmic moments later with the unveiling of Luger to utter despair now as last year's winner, the Nature Boy, comes out at number 1 and Heenan goes absolutely ballistic. And I just love the touches of Gorilla keep jabbing him with a stick by pointing out that no one has ever won the Rumble when coming in at number 1. That would, of course, change in 2 years' time. Number 2, another old pro, and that is Bob Backlund himself. Former WWF champion who did it for a number of years in the 1980s before dropping it to the Iron Sheik. He has recently made his big comeback to the WWF and looking for a fairy tale Rumble tonight. Decent enough tussle back and forth. Flair dominates early in the match. He eliminates Papa Shango. He also has a nice little tussle with Grand Japan champion Tenryu. 2 legends from different countries go at it, exchanging knife-edge blows. You get a bunch of special attractions in this Rumble, which are just like to make up the name. Carlos Colon as well. They really must have been desperate to make up the numbers. But finally, we get the showdown everybody's waiting for as Mr. Perfect hits the ring and Flair and Perfect go at it back and forth. Heenan is really nervous throughout. Perfect with the rocket launcher off the top rope and eventually a clothesline, Flair going over in slow motion, but Ric Flair's hopes of making it 2 years in a row for the Rumble dashed by his arch rival Mr. Perfect. The crowd popped pretty big and they will renew this rivalry tomorrow night on Raw, where they will face off in a loser leave town matchup, and Gorilla is on form tonight because he points out that if either one of these men win this Royal Rumble but then lose that loser leaves town match tomorrow night, they won't be able to go to Mania and get the title shot. A bold move if WWF had done that. That would have been interesting to see them get around that. The crowd popping pretty hard for Perfect. At this point, he's got to be one of the favourites to win the whole Rumble, right? Well, especially with this crappy field. But no, he's actually out pretty soon afterwards as Jerry Lawler and a bunch of other wrestlers eliminate him. Despite this, the Brain is still down in the dumps over Flair being eliminated moments before. I like actually the way Gorilla tries to sell the stakes of the match, saying stuff like Coco Beware could be in the main event at WrestleMania, or Max Moon, who makes his final WWF appearance in this match, could be in the main event at WrestleMania. And Bobby's like, well, it's just not fair to Flair. I like how we get a couple of Rumble legends in the likes of the model Rick Martel and Greg the Hammer Valentine making comebacks for this show. Realistically, neither are going to win the match, but they both have Royal Rumble pedigree. Like, they both lasted around about an hour or close to an hour in various Rumbles. I think Martel was in the 90 Rumble, Valentine was in the 91, so good to see them involved, and Martel gets a decent run actually, and that's good because I'm a fan. We get to about the halfway point of the Rumble, that signals the big entrance of one of the firm favourites, and that is the dead man himself, The Undertaker, another former WWF champion, looking for that big shot at Mania. He comes in, makes an impact, starts cleaning house. But hey, check this out. 41-year-old former champion Bob Backlund, he was in at number 2. He's still there, goddammit. He's been there around 30 minutes. He's held his own, eliminated a couple of guys, and has survived and held on. And even as Taker starts cleaning house, Backlund is able to survive, especially when the next sequence of events leads to him getting a well-earned breather, because we get our third WC debut of a former WCW guy of tonight, and this one is something which no one saw coming, and boy, they wish they had. Check this out, because what's that? Yes, it's the super furry animal himself, right out of Greek mythology, or so it seems, the Giant Gonzalez, the former El Gigante from WCW, making his surprise WWF debut, once and for all proving that Vince really does have a fetish for big men. He's announced as being 8 foot tall, so he must have shot up a few inches since his WCW days only a year ago. But he confronts The Undertaker. He's not even in the bloody Rumble. He doesn't care. He is Harvey Whippleman's new man, and this is all revenge for Taker putting his former man Kamala on the shelf during their feud last week. Gonzalez comes out of nowhere, rises The Undertaker. He eliminates him even though he's not in the Rumble. I don't know how that works, but it's all academic anyway since Taker can't continue. A real low light in the Rumble this year, and oh brother, I don't think anyone was looking forward to this feud. The announcers, pros as always, put it over like bosses. Fair play to them. With Gonzalez and Taker, pretty much signals the downfall of the Rumble from that point. It's like literally halfway through, and bar a couple of highlights, it's a pretty forgettable match from here on in. One of the better things in the second half is the novelty when Yokozuna comes out and he has a sumo style standoff against another former sumo champion. Is John Tenta himself, the Earthquake, the former big dog, against the new boy on the block. So Zuna over 500 pounds, Tenta's not far off that mark. They stand off, and it appears, because Zuna's been dominating since coming in, it seems like Earthquake has the best chance of eliminating him, splashes him in the corner, tries to get him over, but eventually Zuna comes back, gives him a belly-to-belly, which is impressive, and belly-to-bellies him over the top rope. Zuna eliminates Earthquake. Macho Man coming out for a decent-sized pop. He's in semi-retirement, but once again, if anyone's going to eliminate Yokozuna at this point, it is Macho Man. Backlund's still struggling and holding on in there. He eventually is tossed over by Zuna, but what a great story that is. Backlund on his Rumble debut, and not long after his big WWF comeback, sets a new record for the Rumble, lasting over an hour, a record that would stand all the way till 2004, so a decade later, and it would be broken at that Rumble by Chris Benoit. But what a great achievement for Backlund. And he can still go. But then we get Macho and Zuna in the closing stages. Macho getting some high-risk blows in, eventually grounding Zuna, which is a big deal in itself. He hits his elbow off the top rope, and would you believe it, the pro Macho Man, forgetting that pinfalls don't count, and he's tossed over from a sitting position off Zuna over the top rope, crashing down. Yokozuna wins the WWF Royal Rumble and becomes the #1 contender for the title and will main event WrestleMania. The Sumo champion rolls on. So the result was right, and it gives him a little bit of a spark, a little bit of a rub, Macho Man being the last one eliminated by him. I sort of have mixed feelings on the closing moments. It feels a bit flat because of the nature of it, and I don't really buy that someone with the experience of Macho would forget that pinfalls don't count in the Rumble, but it's sort of the heat of the moment type thing, and it's at least, it looks pretty cool. It's like a novelty type spot that they haven't done before. That's why they went for it. But if it was someone with less experience than Macho, I would have bought it a bit more. But Macho, once again, is a pro and gives Zuna the rub. And Zuna is the right outcome. They've been putting a rocket up his arse ever since he debuted late in '92. And he's on quite the rolls. And around in Royal Rumble, I've got to say. But he books his place at WrestleMania 9. And I'm still going to give this Rumble like a 3-star type rating, down and pretty weak overall. It still had enough going on with the stories to make it sort of watchable. I enjoyed the fairy tale story with Backlund. I enjoyed Yokozuna going over some good stuff with Macho. I enjoyed Perfect and Flair from earlier on in the match. But overall, it was definitely one of the weaker Rumbles, but I'll still give it 3 stars. So the 93 Rumble, one I look back on and actually hasn't aged that well. It's overall a bit of a disappointment. A strange card though, because there's nothing terrible on it. Like, I only gave the Steiner Brothers match a low rating because it is basically a squash, and they weren't really given a decent size opponents in the Beverleys. That was very anticlimactic. Match of the night, the WWF title match, definitely Bret Hart and Razor. Couldn't really have asked for much more. The debut of Narcissus was well handled, but then you had the disappointment of the night, which was the IC title match. I always remember enjoying that match, but revisiting this time, it is a disappointment. Of course, Shawn and Marty would have another chance to impress later on in the year. But you've got filler matches, Bigelow and Bam Bam. Again, that was... Piccolo and Bossman, again, that was probably job done, but that was a pretty standard plodding big man match that it once again felt like filler. So overall, it's up and down. I was disappointed in the Rumble bar a few moments. Definitely one of the weaker Rumble matches from this time, maybe ever. Like, the field was just pretty thin. When you take away some of the top draw talent from the upper end of the card, like Bret, Razor, Shawn, then it does feel like the WWF at this point are struggling with their talent roster to really fill out with quality guys. And I've got to say, certainly compared to the last 2 Rumble pay-per-views, this is quite a big step down. 92 was a very strong pay-per-view mostly, and it had the plus of being headlined with such a memorable Rumble match and performance from Flair. And the 91 Rumble, although the Rumble match itself was hit and miss that year, you did have a very strong undercard. The 91 card, top to bottom, was one of the best Rumble cards. So this doesn't really stack up that favourably, but there's certainly enough highlights to recommend at least giving it a watch. So that's my take on the 1993 Royal Rumble. I will be back very soon with the next Raw review, which is from the night after, which of course has that loser leaves town match, Perfect and Flair, the big blow off to their feud in the WWF. And also I will be building up to the next big pay-per-view, which is WrestleMania 9, April 9th, Caesars Palace, Las Vegas, Nevada. A bit of a different feel to this year's WrestleMania. We'll see how that goes and if it can improve on this Rumble. But thanks for listening once again, guys. Like and subscribe as always. Share me out on social media. And I will leave you with some highlights from the 93 Rumble. See you soon.